Hello, my name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. This is Chuck Wolf. You're listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Welcome to all my regular listeners. It's great to be back with you. I'm here the first and second Wednesdays of each month, and so this is September, and it's the first Wednesday, and here I am, 12 noon to 1 p.m. The show is the Emotion Roadmap. Take that wheel and control how you feel. So today I'm going to have a special guest on because in controlling how we feel, one of the things that is impacting the way many of us feel, in fact, in some ways all of us, is what's happening across our political divide. And you've heard me talk at different times about the show. I try not to be political, but I do try to help people manage their emotions and help people deal with their emotional challenges in their life where they are basically dealing with all kinds of folks. And my good friend Carl Frano sitting out here giving me a bit of a hard time about the political discussion we're about to have. But anyway, I've got a guest coming on. His name is Al Smith. Hi, Al. This is Chuck. Are you there? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I'm on my landline.
Okay, great, Al. I'll be with you in a second. If you could just hold for a second, you can stay right there, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about the show.
Okay.
So I want to just, first of all, welcome everybody to the show. Again, if you're a regular listener, you know the show's about dealing with emotionally challenging situations. And often I have people call in, and I've had some great shows lately with people calling in, just asking questions about their lives, about the challenges to their lives and the things that are upsetting to them, that they're confused about, that they're uncertain how to proceed. And lots of times what I've found over the years is that smart people, when they're stuck, it's almost always something emotional that's happening. Well, one of the places people have been stuck for a long time is in having and understanding how to have a discussion with somebody who might disagree with them, who might have a different view of what's important to them about all kinds of things. And one of the things that has resonated with people in recent times is our political divide. And there's lots of reasons for that, and there's a lot of explanations. And this show isn't about taking a side or taking a position, but it is about increasing civility. It is about helping people have respectful conversations, especially with the people you love and care about. But not just with those folks, maybe at home, but also with the people at work. Because politics comes up at work too. And we're getting closer and closer to an election. And I just want to talk a little bit about that today. And I have a guest speaker on, someone that I've grown to like and work with over the last number of years, where we've worked together to create more bipartisanship in our world and in our country. And there's a very special event coming up in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to welcome, again, my regular listeners to the show. And I will provide time at the end of the show for people to call in if you do have questions that you wanted me to help with, and try to provide some answers. And for those of you that are new to the show often helps listeners who call in deal with emotionally challenging situations, whether at work or at home in the community, at some point in their lives where they're stuck, where they're emotionally stuck, where the emotions in play are concerning and confounding them, and they want some help. And I use the technique I developed called an emotion roadmap to guide them through their sequence of circumstances that they're experiencing to help them to achieve a positive, at least potentially positive outcome. And those of you that listen regularly know that we often get to a place where people feel really good about what they've got as a plan, as an emotional plan going forward when they finish with our conversation. And most importantly, I'm trying to teach everybody who's listening how to use this emotion roadmap in their own lives. So as you hear somebody else talk about a situation, you may say to yourself, hey, that's something going on in my home with me as well. But even if it's not something similar to what's going on for you, you'll learn the technique about how to change your emotions when your emotions that you're feeling are unhelpful to more successful, more positive emotions that generate better outcomes. And one of the groups that is working in a similar way in some instances is a group called Braver Angels. And Al's a representative and a leader in Connecticut for this group called Braver Angels. And Al and I have worked together in another group that you've heard me talk about if you're a regular listener called No Labels. Now, No Labels often is very engaged with the actual politicians in D.C. on the federal level. And one of the things that they achieved a number of years ago that has been extremely successful is something called the Problem Solvers Caucus. And Al and I will talk a little bit about that, a little bit about No Labels, some of the work we did together there. And then what's happening on Thursday night at 7:30 that you may want to tune into. It's a Zoom online conversation with two representatives from Connecticut who are one Republican and one Democrat talking about the need for, the challenges with, and the efforts to make bipartisanship happen. And I'm excited to tell you about that and have Al speak to it, and we'll get to that in a second. And now I just want to tell you a little bit about Al. So I met Al in working a number of years ago in No Labels, having met him as one of the people who was also very active in Connecticut. There were a number of us who became very active in a No Labels volunteer group. Well, No Labels is brilliant at their ability to impact and influence politicians. Much of what you've seen passed in the way of legislation in recent times has come about in part because of their work with the House of Representatives, with this thing called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and then a bicameral meeting with senators who are bipartisan and the Problem Solvers Caucus. And again, we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But that's No Labels, but they're not great at outreach. So what they're good at and really great at times is working with the people in D.C., the elected officials. But people who are trying to help each one of us regular folks learn how to have conversations in our families about politics, about what we believe to be true when it's different than what someone we care for and love believes to be true. How do you do that? Now, it isn't just in families. It's also in neighborhoods. It's in communities. It's in your religious organizations. It's in your clubs where people are really on one side or the other of this big divide we seem to have in the country. Well, there's one group that's been incredibly successful and doing a tremendous amount of outreach, and that's Braver Angels. And so Al took some leadership interest in that and is working in a field called the Braver Politics aspect of Braver Angels. And now, Al, if you don't mind, you want to tell us a little bit about your role and what you're doing in Braver Angels, and we'll come back and talk about the No Labels in a minute. But I would like you to tell people about Thursday night, about what's happening, and about how you got involved in what's going on at 7:30 this coming Thursday, which is tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chuck. Yeah, actually, let me take you back a few years, back to when I retired about 12 years ago, and I just looked around and saw, and I was a news junkie, and I just saw what was going on in Congress and actually society as a whole, where people were so divided and there was such animosity, such vitriol, whether it be in the political arena or even in society, so that if you had a different viewpoint than somebody else, you just write that person off. And Braver Angels saw that. We had three founders back in 2016, and after the 2016 election, these three founders said that there's just such divisiveness. Let's create a movement across the United States to try to change that. And a couple of the founders were very much into psychological therapy and psychiatrists and whatever, and just emotional understanding. So they started this in 2006. Now in over 40 states. There's over 75 alliances within these 40 states. And I got involved in about 3 years ago. They were looking to form an alliance in Connecticut. And so myself and another person who's a co-chair, we're both co-chairs of the Connecticut Alliance, we said, we raised our hands. And one thing that attracted me to Braver Angels is with Chuck, I was involved in No Labels, and there's a lot of organizations out there today, Fix US, and I can go on, and they're all trying to change kind of what's going on in the country and why we're headed in the wrong direction kind of thing. But Braver Angels was the only one that had a real movement ongoing. They just were constantly growing the organization, and they constantly had people engaged and informed, and so the Connecticut Alliance, we grew over the last 3 years. And Chuck, do you want me to hone in on September 8th or some of the things we did before that?
Well, why don't we mention September 8th and talk a little bit about it, and we'll come back and talk about it again, because everybody what I find, Al, is that people tune in at different times in the radio show. So I'd like to bring it up and talk about it a couple of different times, at least today. And so why don't you introduce it now, and so people know what it's about and what's happening. And let me just add one thing, because I think this is really important. One of the things that I also became a member of Braver Angels. I have been not as active as I was in No Labels at this point, but hoping to become more so. But one of the fellows that founded it's going to be the moderator in this particular event coming up that Al's going to talk about in a minute. It's a fellow named Bill Doherty. And one of the things I learned about Bill was that he used to be a marriage therapist. As Al pointed out, there was a lot of concern around the emotional aspects of what's happening when people try to talk to each other, and they talk to each other about differing viewpoints or differing beliefs. And Bill took some of the techniques, apparently, from marriage therapy, where people who loved each other but were struggling to stay together experienced difficulty. And in his work to try to bring people back together, he found some of those same techniques were really useful in presenting to people on the different side of the political aisles. And so there were things like, can you tell me as if you're a Democrat or a liberal or a progressive, or however you describe yourself? They called that blue. And if you were a conservative, and whether Make America Great Again, Republican, or Republican in name only, whatever conservative tone you are, you're red. And so there were reds and blues. And so he would ask the blues to say, if you were in the red group, how do you think they'd describe the blues? And he would ask the red group, if you were in the blue group, how do you think they describe the reds? To help people get in touch with how the others might be seeing them. And then to begin the process of understanding how we begin to align ourselves with at least an understanding, if not an agreement, but an understanding of why people might feel differently than we do. And I just wanted to mention that because I think that's an important aspect of why it seems to be so successful. Because, again, these aren't spouses that are getting it, although it might be, but this is more just people across the spectrum. If you sign up for one of these workshops, obviously you're sort of a selected group, right? You're not somebody who's just steeped in their own stuff and isn't even interested in trying to learn how to get along with somebody else. But if you're interested in trying to understand, how could somebody believe so differently than me? I think Doherty has done an amazing job with some of the techniques he's brought to this. So I just wanted to introduce that before you talked about it, Bill. I wanted to talk about Bill rather, Al. So, Al, would you go ahead and now talk about what's going to happen on Thursday?
Yeah, on Thursday, we have an hour-and-a-half session, a Zoom session, called Moving Beyond Polarization, Making Politics Work. And a little bit of the background in this is every time my district representative in Connecticut, and this is the Connecticut State House, it's not the district representative that goes to Congress, and so he would have coffees, and at the coffees he would ask for what people like is going on, what's not going on, any suggestions. He would bring everyone up to date in what's going on in Hartford in terms of what's good, what's bad, what's some of the obstacles and challenges he had. And I found him to be very pragmatic, very open and honest. I know he's a Republican, but at one of the sessions he says, I really like Governor Lamont. I don't believe in his ideology. I'm more conservative, he's more liberal, but he's a really good guy. He's trustworthy, and I get along well with him. And I'm thinking to myself, well, isn't that how all politicians should feel about those on the other side? So I asked him one time, I told him about Braver Angels. I said, if we had a function where we can kind of bring your mindset out into the public and show people how government should work, he said, yeah, I'd be definitely open to it. So we had a red or a conservative or Republican who had the mindset that I think all politicians should have. And then, lo and behold, one of the people in our Connecticut steering committee said, gee, I met this lady who's a representative in the State House. She's a Democrat. And, God, she is just so down to earth, and she cuts out all the hyper-partisanship and just wants to do what's right for all Connecticut voters, Republican and Democrat. And so I got together with this guy, said, well, let's get them together. Let's create an event around the fact that they both like to work across the aisle. They both actually like each other a lot. They started in the State House in the same class, 2015. And I thought that would be a real model of when people have a relationship, they trust each other, they like each other, good things happen in government. So that's what we created. It will be an hour and a half, and like Chuck said, moderated by Bill Doherty. And what people, I hope, will hear is that there is polarization in Hartford, not quite to the extent as we see in Congress and D.C., but there is polarization, and there is need to build relationships and emotional ties with people if they want to get stuff done. And that there is commonality, there is common ground if people just allow themselves to do that in government. And so I can give Chuck the website of Connecticut Braver Angels, and they can go there, and anyone interested, please tune in on Thursday at 7:30. The site you want to go to is ct.braverangels.org. That's, again, ct.braverangels.org. And you will see the event listed, and it will say to register, and then to register, you'll give you a name and information and whatever, and then you will be sent a link for the session on Thursday.
So you have to have an email and you have to have a computer or a smartphone to be able to do this, right? So in order to be able to see this, and what will they actually see, Al? How is it going to open up? Is there going to be presentations by the two different elected officials? Will Bill open it up and talk a little bit about what the outline for the hour and a half is? Will people be able to ask questions? Is there any kind of format or outline that you could share at all?
Yeah, so the format will naturally have introductions and a welcome, and then one of my co-chair in Connecticut Alliance, he will introduce the two representatives and Bill Doherty. He will also mention Connecticut Public and the Rell Center at Hartford University. Both of them are very much for what we're doing, and they are supporters, and they have put the word out to all their mailing lists and all their media stations to tune in to see this. So my co-chair will introduce that, and then they'll turn it over to Bill. And from there, for probably the next half hour, Bill will just discuss with these two representatiors, why they got on the call, what they feel is going on in Hartford, relationships, maybe Bill is so good at this, things they have in common, which can kind of bring people together, and really end up with bipartisanship in government.
Well, let me just say, for anybody that's listening and ever thought that, hey, I don't know that I can do anything to change the way the culture is in the United States. And I'm worried. I mean, there's people that are worried about civil war coming down the road. I don't see that happening. But it is tense, and it is so argumentative and so polarized at times that it does feel like, violence could break out, at least in different parts, and has in different ways over the last several years. But if you want to create more civility and understand how you might work as a volunteer in some ways to help everybody to be more respectful of differences, different opinions, diversity of thought. If you want to know an organization and be a part of an organization, you can volunteer to be a part of this. But I wouldn't ask you to volunteer without the opportunity to see what they do. And I think it's a real coup that Al and the other co-chair and the people involved in the Connecticut committee got Bill Doherty to be a part of this. You have to understand that this is thousands and thousands of people across the country, and Bill's one of the co-founders. And this is, I think it's a great opportunity. I'm very excited to see it myself. And I encourage everybody, if you have an interest in this aspect of how to be more civil, how to be more respectful of other people's points of view, how to have people understand, how to have people be more accepting of your points of view. I can't tell you how many callers I've had over the years who have called in and said, hey, how do I talk to people about this stuff in the workplace? I mean, I got most people, they're in this group of progressives, I'd say. And I'm not a really staunch right-wing Republican, but I don't necessarily agree with all the progressive stuff. But if I say anything that feels like it's a disagreement, it's like I get attacked. How do I stop that? And also people who have been progressive have that in certain circumstances, although it's less in our state because we tend to be a blue state. But it's less. It still exists that sometimes people who have very liberal thinking and thoughts and values and beliefs, are in with people who are very conservative. And same thing sort of happens where they bring up their points of view and, it's like they're not really, there's no physical assault, but they're kind of shouted down. And so how do we have more openness? So I think one of the things that strikes me about why I consider this so powerful is if I'm only talking to people that agree with me, then sure, we're agreeing with each other and that feels good, but I'm not really learning anything new. If I am talking to somebody that I think is a really smart person, I really believe after talking to them, they're a really smart person, and they're really steeped in a very different mindset than I am. If I approach that with how do I change their mind, then it's going to be argumentative. If I approach it with the idea that I want to learn why they think, why they feel, what they do, and why it's so different than what I think and feel, and that's how you grow. At least that's what I believe. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm really glad that we're sharing this with you. And I hope you take advantage of it. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other things in a minute. But would you give one more time how people can register for this?
Yeah, you just go online, Google or whatever, put into your browser CT dot Braver Angels, all one word, .org. And when you go on that site, you will see the first thing on the homepage is the event, because we want to promote that. And you will go to the bottom and it says to register, click on. And once you do that, it'll ask you for some information and your email address, what have you, and then it goes into to a company we call it Eventbrite, and they coordinate and manage all of this, and then they'll send out a link to you, and just anytime within 10 minutes of the start of the show or the event at 7:30, just come on and you'll see a lot of people there in the Zoom chat, all in the boxes, and then we'll start at 7:30.
Now it's ct.braverangels.org. That's what you said, I believe. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so I encourage people to take advantage of this because this is, again, one of the things that I've been involved with, and Al and I will talk about that in a minute, is at the federal level, and we've tried to do some things at the federal level. This is at the state level, so this is very local to everybody in Connecticut that's listening. And if you're listening in New York, which we have listeners in New York who listen to us live, and then we have listeners all over the country or in the world really that know about WPKN because it's an award-winning radio station, and listen from all over the place. You can listen in too. While it won't be about your local politics, I think you'll get a sense of what's possible, and you may want to duplicate in your own state. And hopefully we have more of these kind of events in Connecticut as well. And as a community radio station, we can't endorse candidates, and so I don't want to speak about who's on this panel as an endorsement. of those people because we're not having the other people who might be running against them on the radio show. But this is just an event that I want to tell you about, and I would like to Al, have you mention who the two people are and where they're from, and just so people know, because that will also, I think, provide some incentive for some people to listen who are from those particular areas.
Yeah, my representative, the Republican, is Stephen Harding, and he handles Brookfield, where I live, half of Danbury and Bethel. The other individual is Kristen McCarthy Vahey, and she is the district representative in Fairfield.
So we're located in Bridgeport. So again, a number of people that might know this person and perhaps not the other, but I know we have listeners in Brookfield too. So again, if you're listening and these are people in your own areas of representation, then you may have even more interest. But again, I encourage all of you just to listen, not because we want you to vote for a candidate, or this isn't about voting for anybody. This is about a philosophy of how people can work together to make things, the best things possible, happen for individuals and for our state. And that's what we want every politician, elected official, to be more like statesmen necessarily than politicians, perhaps. Okay, Al, you want to talk a little bit about your background with No Labels, and I'll share a little bit about what we've done together? Because No Labels is another group that you may have some interest in at least learning about.
Yeah, my interest with No Labels is when they started about the time I retired, and I tuned into a cable station, and they had their first get-together of all their founders and putting this organization together, and it's really, they've been very focused and done very good things inside the Beltway. When they started, they said, should we tackle, town government and state government and federal government? And they said, that's too big a scope. Let's just do what we know the best, because a lot of these people had a long tenure and career in Washington, D.C. So that's what they've been focused on. And my feeling was I was just so frustrated tuning in every night and seeing Republicans demeaning Democrats and Democrats demeaning Republicans, and no problems in the country were solved. So every year after year after year, immigration was unresolved, the debt was unresolved, crime was unresolved, the drug problem was unresolved, infrastructure, nothing was done, and on these huge, big top subjects, and nothing got done. And so I found No Labels like Chuck did, and followed them and still follow them. But then along the way, again, I found braver angels, and they were very organized, and so we started in Connecticut.
Well, Al and I met, I guess, 2018, 2017, sometime around that time frame, because I went down to D.C. when No Labels had a big event. I'd sort of heard about them and had somebody actually, Paul Connery actually was the one who introduced me. Paul was on the radio show back then. I've been on the air. This is my 13th year, so I've been on for a while. And I think I began talking about this around 2017. And there was a big event in D.C., and it was really an interesting event where they had all kinds of speakers that were affiliated with their group, No Labels. And one of the things that I learned that they had created was this Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress. Now, some of you may have read about them, but a lot of people don't know about the Problem Solvers Caucus. Like other caucuses, they have their set of rules, and they have a way of joining, but there's just a little bit unique in the sense that you have to sign a pledge. Not only do you have to sign a pledge when you join the Problem Solvers Caucus, but you have to come in with somebody from the other party. So think about that for a second. In other words, as a Republican, you can't just say, hey, I'd like to put on my resume, I'm a problem solver. Well, that's fine, but you have to find a Democrat who wants to come in with you. And the two of you together have to sign a pledge that says, if 75% of everybody in our caucus wants to vote for certain legislation in a particular way, and at least 50% of your own group wants to vote for the same legislation in a particular way, that you'll agree to vote for that. That way we know that when we're going to go to the speaker and say that we have a group of people, in this case somewhere around 50 to 60, the number varies depending on who's in office at what time, people, that's a lot of votes. And we will actually use our caucus, all of us are willing to vote for this legislation that we believe is in the best interest of the country and the people we represent in our respective states. Now, that's different than doing what the party asks. I mean, you'd think it'd be aligned, but sometimes parties, unfortunately, whether Democrat or Republican or other parties, simply seem to want the power and not necessarily what's best for the country. So this group of people has really been involved with the very recent bipartisan infrastructure deal, the first one that came out a couple of years ago. They changed the rules in the House to make it to allow for legislation from the minority party to come before Congress in ways that it used to be prevented. So they've had not as much impact as I would like, but they've had some really significant impact in certain places. So that's how we sort of found out about it. And I thought, wow, this is great. It's really great to see a group of people who are willing to sign a pledge. They're saying they're willing to do what's right for the country, and even when they have to buck their own parties. And I thought that was really important. So I've begun to look at people that I think about voting for, at least, who have that kind of philosophy. They don't have to vote the same way I want them to vote on everything that I care about. I don't expect them to agree with me all the time, but I am looking for people that bring this philosophy in, because I think that's what's in the best interest for really all of us, and that's what I'm hoping. And so Al and I did a few things together. We actually, Al was helpful to me when I worked with Peter Salovey at Yale University, and remember, Al, we put together a panel. And we had A.B. Stoddard come up, who was a political pundit, actually, but she's affiliated with No Labels. And she came and spoke about, how polarization happened in how it came about. And we had somebody from a Yale alumni who had worked in the Reagan administration. And we had a Yale alumni who had worked in the Clinton administration. And it was really a fun panel, and No Labels helped us with it, and they streamed it. I think at least over different points during the panel's discussion, at least 15,000 people tuned in, that we were told, with the live stream. So we thought we influenced that, and then we pulled together. By the way, if anyone's interested in knowing their own representatives or their senators, bipartisan rating. I mean, this isn't a perfect rating criteria, but it is interesting. You can look up Lugar, Lugar, bipartisan index, and you can get the record of the level of bipartisan that this institution and group of people have created this criteria, and you can see where your representative, your federal representative, and your senator fall. So you can see where Blumenthal falls, and you can see where Murphy falls. And if you I can tell you, I've looked. I think they're towards the bottom of the bipartisan list, the two of them. But you can look for yourselves. But anyway, and then look for your representative and look and see where they are on this list, and you could at least know where your representative is from this criteria. But then we decided we try to work with some of these problem solvers, and we created a joint effort with Braver Angels and No Labels, where Braver Angels promoted a conversation about bipartisanship, similar to what you're doing here, Al, really, right? With two representatives from different states. One was Elaine Laurier from Virginia, who's a Democrat, and the other is Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Bucks County in Pennsylvania. And we had them with John Wood Jr., the national ambassador for No Labels, being a moderator, and Ryan Clancy, who is the strategic leader for No Labels. And the two of them were the people facilitating questions, and it was a wonderful event. And then we've also organized some efforts to, sometimes you look at your politicians in your particular county or district or your state, and you think, boy, they're never going to change who they are. And so you feel frustrated that you can't influence them. But one of the things we organized with No Labels one year was we said, well, we've got some people out there that are at the top of this bipartisan index that we know are part of this problem solvers group, and they're in some tough races. Even if we're not from their state, can we help support them in their campaigns? And so we did that for like 4 different people, members of this problem solvers group. Those are the things I remember, Al. Any thoughts you want to share about any of those events?
No, I think you covered it well. If I can just come back to the what you were talking about earlier, and maybe it touches on the methodology of Braver Angels and why I feel so strongly about it. Braver Angels understands, as we all do, that the world today seems to be everyone's stereotyped or labeled, and if the person is a different label than you, whether it be on race or political party or whatever, if it's different than you, that person's wrong and you're right, and that person, you write that person off. And like Chuck said, you never learn anything until you take time to listen and understand the other person's side of the story or their opinion. Not that you have to change your opinion, you don't have to change your ideology, but take the time to listen to where they're coming from, and I think everyone's better off for it. Braver Angels on a national basis, we have the Connecticut Alliance, but nationally they do ongoing debates, discussions, and workshops, skills workshops. And these debates, for example, take on some of the most difficult, controversial topics. For example, one of the debates was on abortion. Should there be abortion or not? There was something on race. And when you hear that topic, and I look and I say, gee, I got to register for that because I feel strongly about, or gun control. I feel strongly about for or against gun control, and I want to get on that Zoom call because I'm going to really voice my opinion to all those people who think differently. And once you get on the call, and there may be 100 people, 200 people there, they have a moderator. And Braver Angels is very good at setting the ground rules, bringing down the negative emotions and the tone, and people then, each side voices what they feel. And by the end of the hour or 2-hour debate, everyone seems to understand the other side. But going into that kind of a session, that debate, you immediately hated the other person who has a different opinion. And that's why I think Braver Angels is so successful. They bring people together. They're not afraid to tackle any controversial subject. And it's about listening, not trying to change people's minds, listening and understanding. And it brings the emotions and the temperature down.
Yeah, I think they've taken on Mar-a-Lago too. The search of the former president's house. They really do take on the topics that are of most interest and that are most compelling and most divisive, and trying to calm the waters by allowing people to speak to these things from the standpoint of what they believe in their hearts to be true. And they're not trying to sway anybody to one point of view or another. They're just trying to understand. And if you seek to understand, I think that makes for a better world for all of us to live in, if there's more of that.
Actually, Chuck, the Connecticut, our alliance, I guess it was last year, we put on a discussion. We didn't want to have a debate because this was so controversial on the subject of critical race theory. And everyone has their opinions about critical race theory. It's all bad or it's all good. And we did a lot of research on it, and we looked at the myths and the facts around it, and what it is and what it isn't. And we did the discussion. We presented all this up front, and then we let people in the audience ask questions. Now, I know some people were against it in the audience and some were for it, but the questions were toned down, and it wasn't any finger pointing or animosity. It was civilized, civil discourse, civil questions, wanting to know more about critical race theory. And I was amazed that people on that kind of a topic come together with no yelling, no screaming, and they were there to learn about the pros and cons type thing. And that's just one example.
That's great. I think I want to mention again, Al, about the event because, again, people join us at different times to listen to the show. And by the way, you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM listener-supported radio. And thank you, everybody out there who are our supporters. We couldn't do this without you. And I'm glad that you're listening to this show. And if you're a new listener, welcome. If you're a regular listener, it's so nice to have you back again. And we're talking with Al Smith. And Al is a leader in the Braver Angels movement in Connecticut. And Al's, we're actually been talking about a particular event that's coming up. Al, you want to mention it again and just talk about how people register for it and what it is?
Yes, it's the subject is moving beyond polarization, making politics work. We're going to have a red or conservative, a Republican state house representative on, along with a blue or a liberal Democrat state representative, and it's going to be moderated, and they're going to have a discussion. And we know in advance that these two people are not on the fringes. They understand they're there in government to make government work, to find common ground, to solve problems. And that's how it should be with all politicians. Unfortunately, it's not. And so you will hear the moderator talk about how they got into politics, what are some of the positive things they feel about what's going on in Hartford, some of the things that maybe they would like to see change, how to build trust across the aisle. And I think you'll all come away refreshed that government can work in the two-party system.
And the way they register is ct.braverangels.org?
Yes, ct. and then one word, braverangels.org. And you'll go onto our website, and there you will see the event promoted, and at the very bottom it'll say to register, just click on.
And if people want to get to know more about the Connecticut branch of Braver Angels and about Braver Politics, Al, how do they find out information in case somebody's listening may want to think about doing some volunteer work with you folks?
Yes, just go to that site, and you'll see in the upper right-hand corner it says to get involved. Just click on to get involved. It'll take you to a page that talks about all the different ways you can get involved. For example, you might want to get involved in terms of being on a committee to put on a event like we're doing with this event tomorrow. Or you may want to be, there's various roles that you can play as a volunteer, a moderator of events like this, or an organizer for events, or an ambassador who goes out and talks at Rotaries and whatever, what Braver Angels is all about. There is training for all of these roles. So you don't have to come with all the skills to be a moderator, organizer, whatever. But if you're interested in that, all the training's free, and you find out all about that. And we do orientations periodically with new people to Braver Angels to tell them the different ways they can continue to stay engaged with the organization.
Well, I think we're going to probably close there, Al, unless you've got something else you'd like to say. But I want to thank you for being our guest and for sharing what's going on. As I said, I'm very excited about it. I'm planning to tune in at 7:30 tomorrow night and to listen to this. And I hope that lots of other people will join you as well, and that some people decide they want to volunteer and do this. One of the things I know Bill was starting to do and has some interest in is he's been working with a committee in Congress now to try and change the culture. And I think if you have this belief that you want to make a difference, you want to somehow make a meaningful difference, this is what a great way to get involved in doing something positive for you. In this case, you can work at the state level, but Brave Angels works really at the local level, state level, federal government. They really don't have limits that way. The one thing where they are limited, I guess I should say this, is they don't endorse candidates. They want to stay away from that because as soon as they start, they feel as though if they endorse some candidate, then people feel like, no, you're just about this party. And it's very important for their mission that they don't endorse a particular candidate. But other than that, I think it's a great place to want to spend time as a volunteer, I think. Anything else in closing, Al?
Yeah, I would just say we welcome volunteers. If you just want to be a supporter and tune in to the different events we have, you can do that. But we strongly encourage you to get involved. Again, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. It does not take a lot of time. Devote the time. If you believe in the cause, just devote the time that you want to it. But I think you'll find it very rewarding experience, and you will feel like you are making a difference. And we need more people today, we the people, so to speak, to make a difference.
Hey, Al, this will be is this a recorded session that will be someplace somebody can see it if in case they can't make it tomorrow night?
Yes, it will be on. Braver Angels has a YouTube station. I don't know all the particulars right off the top of my head, but if you go on YouTube, I think it takes several days before you'll see it appear there. But you will be able, I believe you will be able to see it on YouTube.
Well, you know what? Maybe if when you find that out later, you and I can talk about that, and I can next week when I'm on, I can mention where people might see it in case they missed it and want to see it later.
And you bring up a good point, Chuck, that we should really probably mention that tomorrow night for anyone who wants to tell a friend who couldn't make the event to see it on YouTube.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Al, for being our guest today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye.
Well, folks, so you've been listening to Al Smith, a friend and somebody I've done some really interesting work with on the political front in trying to create more bipartisanship, more civility, and more respect across all the different beliefs that we have. Challenging, but very worthwhile work. If you want to comment on what you just heard, you can give me a call at 203-336-9756. If you are interested in talking to me about something that you wanted me to address and you are waiting for my show today, you can also call and bring up anything that has to do with using the emotion roadmap. That might be a way to help you in dealing with something that's challenging you right now. Again, the number is 203-336-9756. I'll give you a minute to call. While I'm waiting for that to happen, I would like to just also acknowledge and address the idea of Labor Day. We live in interesting times, right? There's a saying, I guess, about living in interesting times. But my point is, they are interesting. Maybe any time that you're alive is interesting. But one of the things that strikes me is that we have a changing perception of work. And as we celebrated the holiday of Labor Day, I know lots of times people just think of it as a holiday and a time to grill outdoors and to have a picnic and have families and friends gathered together to share good times. But it's also a time to reflect, I think, a bit on work, the nature of work. As you think about the jobs you've held, the jobs you hold, the jobs you hope to hold at some point, as you think about your own work, what value does your work bring? What purpose do you have in doing the job that you do? Are you clear how what you do contributes to the overall benefit of whatever part of any organization you are? Are you appreciated in the way you like to be appreciated? Do you feel like people support you where you might work? Are you supportive of other people downline from you? Perhaps who you report to, teammates you work alongside? What is the value of work to you today? There's something going on called quietly quitting, and I actually wrote a blog post about this recently on LinkedIn. But I'm on till 12:55, as those of you who listen regularly know. So I have about 8 minutes left. So if somebody wants to call and have me address anything that's important to them, I don't want to intrigue you with another subject. I'd really like to take your call if you have one that you'd like to make. So let me give you the number again and give you a moment. 203 336 9756. 203 336 9756. Now, it's been kind of a unique show because we had Al on and we talked about Braver Angels and we talked about no labels and we talked about things that you might do and get involved with in case you want to try to change the world in some meaningful way. I think you can make a difference doing something with Braver Angels in particular these days. In any case, let me tell you a little bit more about this idea of quietly quitting. My blog post went something like this. There's a disturbing set of numbers. These are the analytics about our workforce that have recently come out. And Gallup talked about this somewhat in a recent article they published, I guess, just a day or two ago. And the idea of a Gallup survey is Gallup is really extremely well known and highly credible in the work that they do in trying to survey workers across the country for their attitudes regarding how engaged they are in their organizations. And one of the troubling statistics that have shown up recently is that our younger generations in the workplace seem to be somewhat dismissive of work these days. They seem to be less engaged. They seem to be less committed to doing all that they can to make the organization that they're part of do well. That doesn't mean that they're not doing what they need to do, but they're doing no more than that. And in some cases, if they can do less and get away with it, they're not feeling badly about that. They feel like, why should I do more for this organization? Would this organization do more for me? Is it doing more for me? Or are they simply a transactional experience where I come in, I do something for you, you pay me for it, I go home, I spend the money on my family and my friends and savings for when I retire, and that's the deal. You don't pay me more than you have to pay me, and I don't do more than I have to do for you. And that's where a lot of people are these days. Now, they call it quietly quitting, meaning that there seems to be a lot more people who are in this state of mind where they're disengaged somewhat. I mean, disengaged and just not engaged are different. Disengaged are people who are really just doing the bare minimum and sometimes even working to sabotage where they work because they're so upset with their organizations. They might feel betrayed by their manager or leader or boss or supervisor. They may feel like the organization's values are corrupt, or they may feel like the last layoff was just unnecessary and just lined the very senior people's pockets with a lot of money, and people that I cared about that worked alongside me are now gone and trying to figure out how to pay for their food and their home and so forth. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that are upset with where they work, and the numbers strikingly are not that dissimilar over time, though. The thing that strikes me about what's happening in our world today that's different, and there is some differences, is that we seem in one way to demean work more than we have before. And in light of Labor Day, I thought this is especially useful to think about. There is value in all work. Anyone can find purpose in the work that they do. A job worth doing is worth doing well. It's a quote from a neighbor farmer friend of mine from the Midwest when I lived in Iowa. It was a quote. He often would, he's a very cheerful guy, and we'd talk to him. And I said, how you doing today? He said, well, I'm doing my job, and a job worth doing is worth doing well, and that's how I'm doing it. I mean, he would often have that expression, and that's sort of a philosophy he carried around with him. I don't think people carry that with them so much anymore these days. But when it says we're quietly quitting at work, I thought that's so strange to me because these numbers really aren't that different. I mean, they change every year. They might be somewhat different. But if you look at the Gallup numbers on engagement, on not engaged and disengaged, or I should say highly engaged, not engaged or minimally engaged, and disengaged, the numbers tend to be 20, highly engaged, 60, somewhat engaged, minimally engaged, and 20 disengage. Now, so it's 100%, right? But it's not exact, and it changes from year to year. But I got to say that it's not that different over multiple years. If you look back over 2 decades of time where Gallup has been doing this, you'll see the numbers tend to be around the same numbers. The difference to me isn't that we're quietly quitting, is we're loudly quitting in the way I think about this. We're letting people know we don't like what's going on. Now, we're trying to hide our individual responses so nobody's calling us out for not doing any more than we should, but we're vocal about it. We want people to notice. We want people to understand that it's important that we don't like what's happening in our workplaces. And so we're not going to try very hard to make the work better. But we're going to talk about it. And that's different. We're talking about it. And I think talking about it's a good thing. I'm not critical of that at all. I think when we don't talk about it and it all goes underground, that's problematic. So if you feel that you want your workplace to be something special, where you walk in every day and you feel like what you do matters, I think you can influence that by paying attention to how you're feeling and how you want to feel. What can you do different? How can you influence others to do things different so everybody feels more of this? I'll be talking more about that in the weeks to come. But you've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. This is Chuck Wolf. We're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, streaming all around the world, located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, downtown Bridgeport. And I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening today. And I look forward to seeing you next week. So I want you all to have a great week and to spend time thinking about how you're feeling and how you want to feel, and then do something about it. Make the world a better place. Make you feel better about the world by helping to make the world a better place. Thanks, and see you next time.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.